1 second. Excellent. So, Gaurav, if you want to go through proposal number 10 for us.
Yep. If you could open the proposal side by side at the same time.
1 second.
So then I had a question actually. What's that workflow discussion is all about?
I was going to come to that afterwards, but at the moment, it's really kind of deciding what is the best methods around distributing workflows.
Okay. Okay.
So essentially, a workflow is made up of a number of containers that are run sequentially, and we kind of need to come up with a decision, I suppose, on a number of different things. One, do we, in the interim, just have a big repository filled with workflow YAML and all of the container components and things like that, or do we try and slim things up? But I'll come back around to that anyway.
Yeah, sure. The reason I asked was so there are a few people who are joining first time, and I thought maybe it's like an intro to what workflows are.
Yeah. There are another issues around kind of how to write workflows and things like that as well. So
Awesome.
that's a good point you've raised there, actually. Given that there are a lot of new people on the call, if there are any questions that you want to raise, then or things that you don't understand, then feel free to drop them either in the chat or raise your hand, etc.
So this proposal is about having on timeout and on failure, as we discussed in the last call, to be moved out of your action component and be moved to the root component. The idea behind on failure and on timeout is that these two will be your actions, and what will happen is, let's say your workflow is in execution, and for whatever reason your action timeouts or it fails. Now, whenever an action fails, it is considered that your task is failed and definitely your workflow has failed. Now, in that such a scenario, what you want to do is maybe you want to roll out certain changes and maybe roll back to a different state where you started. So all those things can be drafted in your on timeout or on failure action. So all those components that are currently supported within your action, like environment variables, volumes, all those will be still part of your on failure and on timeout actions. And if you scroll down, there's a sample template which describes. Oh, yep, there you go. Yep. So this is how it's going to look. On timeout, you will have an image. You will have a timeout for that on failure on timeout as well. Then you can mount variables. Oh, sorry, you can have mount volumes, and you can also define your element variables. There was a question from Gianluca, and I would request him to maybe put it in a more detailed way here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I realized my question probably is wrong, because I mean, I like the idea was, can we leave the on failure and or on timeout logic outside from Tinkerbell, and having, like almost like Kubernetes does, where you don't really tell what to do when something fails. You use you write automation for that, because everything has an event. You can watch those events and you can hack on them. But probably, yeah, I don't know. Because you have to run stuff probably inside the server, so maybe inside the worker that you are provisioning. So that makes stuff harder, I presume. Or, I mean, we can even build a logic and say, if your workflow fails, you get an event, you catch the event, and you start another workflow if you need it. I don't know. Having an on failure and an on timeout looks like something that can loop itself forever to me in some way, because on timeout can fail again or can timeout. So what do you do when on timeout? Okay, so I don't know.
Quick question, actually, in terms of how customizable would this be? Just so we've had people questioning adding logic into workflows. So, for instance, the first container that is run as a task would perhaps detect the type of server, and the output from that would then run perhaps a workflow which upgrades the firmware based upon the output of the first container.
I think that would
That's
be
like,
much more.
I think, for the ephemeral workflow data, right? Is that, you know, the first task might create the, or I guess do some sort of introspection in terms of what device it is, write that data to the ephemeral workflow data, and then the task later would pick that up and actually do the updating if that was, you know, kind of the desire there. I guess I should also say, like, this also points towards, like, you know, linear workflows versus something more like a directed graph, which was kind of an intentional design choice to not over engineer or complicate. Like, visualizing how that works is very complex. And then failure scenarios of knowing where or when something did fail becomes a lot harder. So that was like a design choice. We can always revisit that, but that was, you know, what you just proposed would probably, at least the first attempt at it, would get solved by, you know, passing ephemeral data between actions.
Okay, cool.
I would like to suggest something. In this like template, we have two different tasks, and but the on fail and on timeout are same for both of the tasks, right? But what I'm trying to say is, for different tasks, can have different workers, right? So I think this on failure and on timeout should be under a particular
Okay.
task.
Okay. Or maybe, yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, because if you are doing something on a server, you want to roll back on the same server, right? Not the previous one, not the other one, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you have to assign a worker which should be running this action. So either you add a worker there under on failure and on timeout, or you move them under a task, which means you definitely have a workflow. So yeah, I think this makes sense. Nathan, any take on that?
I'm sorry, I missed that last part. Can you repeat that?
So Aman has a suggestion that the on failure and on timeout should be under task, because those two actions need to run on a certain worker, so they should be under task.
Oh, right. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense. Like, it's associated to the workflow, not to a task.
Yeah, Aman, would you mind to just drop that as a comment on the proposal, and I'll make the changes.
Sure, I'll drop a comment on that. Yep.
Sure. Any other questions on to the proposal? Goes once, twice. Oh, it's a win. Cool. If there's anything, please go to the proposal once, and if you have any other questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Is there, sorry, I know that the countdown ended, but one of the things that we brought up at the time, Aman and Gaurav, I remember we, again, along the lines of not over-engineering it out of the gate, but like on failure, on timeout, they feel like events, and you know, having a mechanism to have tasks execute on arbitrary events, and timeouts and failures happen to be one of them. You know, it's a pattern that's probably too hard to ignore. So it might be worth spending at least a few minutes discussing how that would fit in.
So if I understand you correctly, let's take a scenario like, okay, an action detects, okay, this is a scenario which I consider as a failure, and I would report it to the provision, okay, this is a failure for me, and go ahead and execute the on failure. Is it what you're saying?
I guess more so like the system itself would generate events like success or failure or timeout or whatever, something else that would happen, and that a worker could subscribe to those events, and it's up to the worker to implement whatever it wants to do. And so that would also, I think, alleviate some of the concern of having the workflow be responsible for, the timeouts of the timeout or the failure of the failures. That your worker could potentially subscribe to events that Tinkerbell is generating, or sorry, the Tink server is generating, and at that point, it's up to the worker to, or not even a worker, but whatever you have implemented that's subscribing to that to do whatever it needs to do. So it's more of a generic mechanism than something that incorporates that logic here.
At the moment, what we have is report status for each action from the worker, and they are more like in progress, pending, timeout, failure, and success. So whenever there would be a failure detected by reported from the worker, and the provisioner will take care of sending the action which is to be executed on failure to the worker. So I think that meets the needs then.
I mean, I think what Nathan suggested is what I wrote as a comment. And if we go with the on time, on failure as it is in the proposal, we will have to keep it like for a while. So if we say like, listen to those events, attach to those stream, and you can figure out what you have to do if the workflow will fail, or if it timeouts. That's something we don't have to care anymore, or at least we just need to be sure that the events are forwarded.
Instead of worker going to the provisioner saying, okay, I have a failure, tell me what to do. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and ideally, you will start another workflow.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
okay,
so in a summarized basis, I would rather say it should be like a Tink server or the provisioner driven approach instead of worker driven approach, I would say, right? If I'm not wrong.
Well, I'm not sure that I would kind of describe it that way necessarily. I guess, I think that it's just a little bit different, I guess I would say. We also have kind of a similar, kind of I don't want to say issue, but like, how do we implement this for things that would like a phone home service, for instance, that would be phoning home after something completed, but it's kind of running outside of the context of a provisioner or a worker provisioning machine. And so I think that we have kind of described a mechanism to subscribe to the ephemeral data for a workflow in addition to events. And so I think that this would have, I think it's still, we need to like take a couple of turns at it, but I do think that this would fit into some other areas that, that are needed as well. And I think that there's for packet/Pack Linux people on the call, there's a JIRA 8403 which kind of describes some of the thinking around this. But I do think that like subscribing to events or changes is definitely something that would fit a couple of different use cases, one of them being a phone home as well.
Okay. So I'm gonna are there any differences that I can look into, either if it's packet based or somewhere else, so that I get more idea on this?
Honestly, we don't have that today.
Okay.
This is kind of a net new. And so I think it's like a better architecture, I guess I would say, but we don't,
I can walk you through a few of them that I did in the past, and we can see. I mean, with the gRPC layer is not that. I mean, it's easy because it's a stream, so we can have like a streaming subscription to events. So we can rework that and see how it goes.
Sure. Let's do it then. So I'll discuss it with Gianluca more, and we'll update the proposal accordingly, and let's do some POCs around it.
Cool, excellent. So thank you very much for that proposal. It certainly appears like that's a good start, and there's definitely a few things that we can add to kind of enhance that. Next on the list is Aman and support of global timeout.
Yeah, so before I start, can you please go down then in the last week's discussions, yeah, the topics in which we were discussing about like eliminating this global timeout, and I also raised a couple of PRs regarding the same. But then thanks to Nitin that he came into the picture and saved a lot of things. So yeah, so I would just like to. So my point is like, so we should have a global timeout in the workflow. So if I have a timeout in the template, it will only work uh, in the workflow, like in for the Tink only. But is there any possibility? Is there anything like because whenever a machine boots up or whenever it provisions on the machine, it does a lot of things, including the DHCP or TFTP and fetching Aussie files and etc etc etc. So is it something that we should also look into, that my machine should be provisioned including all those stuff like DHCP or Aussies, or like Aussie, taking the Aussie files, booting into a pre-install environment and then executing a workflow or something like that? So we should be able to include it, or I mean,
I
yeah.
wouldn't necessarily include that, I suppose. I mean, the problem that we have is that some server vendors and things like that take a heck of a long time to post and do become in a state where they're ready to actually do things. And you're gonna have to do a lot of research into determining how long a Dell server takes to actually get to a ready state versus a HP server or a Supermicro or something or other like that. So
And
like,
doing this will also create some more complexity, because now you're mixing the time that we do spend executing a workflow plus the time we spend before executing a workflow. So it's going to be a really complicated situation, because I remember Alex did an example with images, and certain images, and they took a lot of time to download. So it will be really difficult to say, okay, this workflow is taking too long and it's bad and it's not suitable for me. But it depends onto the user and what they really need. So yeah, I'm not sure how we can proceed on that. Any ideas?
Yes, so I was just trying to get the ideas around it. If like anybody thinks that it should be done, it should be required, then we need to think more. Else, we can simply have a timeout in the workflow and sorry, in the template, and we can that let it support in the work Ting server or like worker or whatever, wherever it is.
I think
So I
we have to we have to remember that like the experience I get when I run Tinkerbell like on my local network is not the same that we should like the default experience in a proper data center. So
yeah,
the
right.
fact that time changes so drastically is something that usually like data center engineer try to avoid.
Yeah.
Um, so like this the way I see the global timeout is just a safeguard that tells the provisioner that after that amount of time nobody cares about the workflow anymore. So if I think we can place it in the template, and if we think that, if the user think that that should be parameterizable, they can use a parameter and pass it when they create a workflow.
That, yeah, sounds good.
okay, excellent. Next is Gianluca.
I don't remember which one.
It's documentation week.
I call my week documentation week. So Mara, I'm sorry, but I went over a bunch of like items that I had in my list. So you will see a bunch of like pull requests for me about the documentation, and if you have any like document or like notes that you think I should look at, I'm also speaking about the internal package one that maybe I don't know about. Just yeah, send them to me so I can try to wrap them inside the documentation. I worked around the. I had a page for every service now, so we have a place where we can expand the knowledge of each service. And I also reworked the Tinkerbell Terraform on packet documentation, so it's there. Or let me know if you like. That's it. So if you want to join me on the documentation week, just let me know.
Excellent. And again, Gianluca.
Yeah, last one, I presume. Yeah, I had a chat with Nathan about the play with Tink. The name wasn't great for a couple of reasons, mainly because Marcus doesn't like it, and second because if you Google that, it's not a great experience. So I am, yeah, in the past I made a similar project that was called Sandbox, and so the main goal for the proposal is to have a way to repeat, to be sure that the community installs the same version over and over. It doesn't install broken version or version that we don't know about. So it's like it's mainly a copy paste of the deployment with the Docker Compose and stuff like that right now. I presume that in the future, those two stuff will diverge. So if you have any, like, review the proposal and tell me what you don't like, there is a repository that works, not for the Terraform one because I didn't import the change yet that I made this morning, but the Vagrant one works. So the idea is to give to the community something that they can use and that we can help them debug if it doesn't work. Because we get some issues from like community members that are running code and we don't know which code they are running, so it gets harder to figure out. And it's very easy as it is today, just a Docker Compose as the one we have internally. Ideally, my plan will be to have this proposal immersed in, and when we accept that, all the documentation, all the places in the documentation that reference cloning the Tink repository will be changed to clone the sandbox, because the code is because the deployment code is the same, but we know what it runs, so it's easier. That's it. So have a look and let me know. I will be happy to get to an agreement this week so I can close that.
Excellent. Yeah, for kind of the newer people on the call, one of the main things that we've been focusing on is coming up with a way to essentially pin versions of the microservices for Tinkerbell so that we know that end users are actually what end users are actually running, and also being able to help them when they kind of come across issues, because we kind of ran before we walked a little bit with Tinkerbell, and we were updating things so quickly that when the community were having issues, we didn't know what they were running or how new it was or anything like that. So this hopefully will start to improve the stability of what the community is actually using. And it's kind of the first step for us to look at versioning the various components that make up Tinkerbell. So that's this is a fantastic start to that.
Yeah, just to enforce that, as you say, like the semver and the versioning will come. Right now it's just a commit SHA because we push Docker images for that. So just the easiest way to get that. But as soon as all the microservices will start doing proper versioning, we will change the SHA to version, and that should work.
Excellent. So there's two kind of small points that I raised. The workflows discussion ideally will be in the form of a proposal, but mainly I was wondering from people that are on the call who are developing their workflows, where they actually are storing them, and if anybody has any input from that perspective, mainly because the workflows that exist at the moment are a combination of the YAML, which says run this image, run this image, run this image, but also the repository also contains all of the contents of those images as well. So we are trying to work out the best way of how we host workflows, and do we host the workflow YAML, but do we also host all of the contents of what's actually part of those images for people to build as well? The problem behind that is that it could get quite messy. We could end up with a repository that's just filled with tons of code and things like that. However, it would also be a very good place for us to be able to work out what is being repeated, and how we can kind of turn that into, reduce the duplication and start to come up with kind of better ways of doing it. So I'm kind of in two minds in terms of which is the best way of going about this at the moment. There are benefits from allowing everybody to just dump everything that they're kind of having in a central place. And then for us to kind of maybe go back afterwards and start to tidy these things up. Or alternatively, we try and keep workflows in one place and the code that is ran as part of those in a separate area. I think there's a few things happening in the chat.
I didn't ever wrote a complex workflow yet, so I had a look at the one that you wrote about for Ubuntu and the community wrote for CentOS and the Raspberry Pi. I just linked one in the chat, so if whoever never had the opportunity to look at the workflow can have a look at it. But ideally, we already have the ability to say this code can be reused and should stay outside. Because we use Docker images. So if the image is already available in the registry, that can be reused. Otherwise, it has to be built and stay somewhere, I presume. So I think with that model in mind, we already have the reusability and the modularization we need. It's mainly about, like, we don't have a catalog of those.
Yep.
I mean, they are all older Docker Hub, like containers or key, like whatever, query registry. So it's not, no, we need to find a better way to categorize them.
Okay. So I will be writing a proposal, and I guess we will probably circle back on this next week and find out what people's thoughts are on that. The additional thing that I wanted to raise as well is that at the moment we have examples for either doing this directly on packet hardware, or using Vagrant to essentially spin up VirtualBox. One VirtualBox to run all the Docker components of Tinkerbell, and another VirtualBox to be the provisioning worker. I've also started doing some work for QEMU, so you can essentially have a Linux host with Tinkerbell installed, and then use QEMU to spin up fake workers to provision on with Tinkerbell. So we can, that's another environment that people can use to essentially play with Tinkerbell. Does anybody have or work in different ways where they would use different hypervisors, or have any suggestions for other ways of running Tinkerbell? I think Jason may have been looking at something slightly different as well.
Yeah, I've been digging into running Tinkerbell using Kubernetes, mainly trying to come up with a better kind of like rapid iteration development type environment using a local kind cluster and tilt. But you know, there are some challenges there that I'm still trying to overcome, mainly because even if you put libvirt and kind on the same bridge, there's still some communication issues that I'm running into. Mainly things are being snatted that shouldn't necessarily be snatted. But I think there's some benefits there, at least on the developer side, because you can basically live edit code in any of the individual repos and have that code basically hot deployed to the Kubernetes cluster to be able to test as you're making changes. So that's why I've been trying to dig down that path a little bit. I don't necessarily know that's a good use case for more generalized use, you know, but I do think having like a Kubernetes story for deploying would be good. I just wouldn't necessarily recommend kind for that.
Okay, cool.
I'm personally probably more interested on seeing the provisioner running on Kubernetes from a resiliency perspective, to see how it can scale. But only because personally I'm not that great at developing with Kubernetes. So, but that's a personal preference.
So
but
one
there
of
are issues about like how do we scale Tinkerbell, because all the two the two way we made like Vagrant and Terraform are both with all the components in a single box and whatever. So there is definitely a story we have to tell about how do we make the pieces to go independently and scale. But yeah.
Yeah, that, and also the questions that come up around the database and things like that, we can point to pre-existing Helm charts for, you know, running a replicated, you know, Postgres database rather than trying to build up our own deployments for that.
Cool. Okay, so I'll probably put another proposal together around that as well, for us to have a bit of a further discussion on that. Just wanted to see if anybody had any burning desires or burning hypervisors or anything like that that they had a focus on. Excellent. Okay, next is Jason with mirror URLs.
Yes. So as I was going through the aforementioned Kubernetes-based deployment with Kind, one of the things I noticed was that Boots doesn't allow specifying a mirror URL that has a port in it. So I created a PR for that. If anybody can give some feedback there, that'd be great. And then the second item was around the proposal 0008 around standardizing the certificate handling. Gianluca had mentioned not worrying about backwards compatibility, and I wanted to try to get a feel from the rest of the group, you know, whether or not it makes sense to maintain the backwards compatibility with the existing deployment model or just, you know, move on.
I don't know the answer. Mine was like a suggestion because I like less code and fewest path.
I think I just didn't want to be presumptuous with how people are already deploying and using it, and wanted to be a little mindful of that. So,
yeah.
So is this effectively removing or moving away from all of the minting of certificates in setup.sh and?
Not necessarily, but the way that they're specified and passed into Tink from that setup script.
Right. Okay.
I worry about the users like Nathan. If you had any feedback on this, it would be interesting, because what I hear so far is that they have been affected by changes that have been introduced so far. If we had the semantic versions in place, then we could just say live with these versions until you're ready to pick up the latest Tinkerbell changes. But right now, you know, if people are just pulling master and everything is changing on them, it's an impossible experience.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess, you know, in terms of that specific piece, that last piece, you know, the expectation of stability and backwards compatibility, I guess, like, where are we at in terms of that experience? And I know that that was kind of like, you know, an objective for, I think, you know, by the end of this month. You know, do we feel like we're there yet? Have we messaged that to the community? Like, do we have announcements for breaking changes? If we do, like, I guess, where are we at in terms of progress down that path?
So the kind of the bits that we really need at the moment are, and this fantastically goes on to Marcus's line in here, is finding owners for the various microservices. At the moment, we don't have owners for every microservice. So at this point, it's hard for us to say, you know, somebody who looks after Tink or Eagle signing off on a new release or a new version. Mm-hmm. So we don't really have at this point today enough maintainers on all of those different microservices yet to be able to kind of do the signing off as such. But that is work in progress at the moment.
I mean, the reason why I felt confident about writing about the breaking change is because we need to, you know, we didn't advertise that Tinkerbell is stable and we never change, and that's a safe like that's why we can do a BC break. Obviously, we broke Tinkerbell like a few weeks ago when we changed the hardware definition, and we didn't have a way to tell that to the community, and that was a pain. So how do we do it without like Semverse, because it's too hard to do right now altogether? We can be like with like BC break label and like some communication. Um, the way I see it, like we can, the way I would like to see it going is like we can do breaking change until we get to no, we don't have a release, so we can, you know, we can do almost whatever we feel it's sane. Obviously, all the big breaking changes are probably done. This one is a small one that we can probably fit in, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I might break it into two parts. One is, you know, actually having a breaking change mitigation strategy. Obviously, Semver and things like that give you tools to mitigate it. But I think also as a first step, just communicating that it is breaking. You know, I do feel like we have a small enough kind of user base maybe that we can do announcements and notifications enough to ensure that on some cadence, whatever that is, probably on, you know, as it comes in, might be the best now, but you know, some sort of communication would alleviate some of that. Because I mean, even internally, we have had users who are writing against a certain data model and it breaks, or they're writing against a certain logic that they're expecting and it breaks after they upgrade or deploy to a different location. And so, you know, 90% of that would be like a quick communication saying, hey, it broke, or it's going to break, you know, at this date, or once we merge this thing, and hey, it just happened. You know, in the absence of having a full kind of semantic versioning available to us. So I guess something to consider maybe in terms of setting up, like we can set up that communication, you know, not now, but like very soon, you know, like in like this week or something, that would allow us to, at least in our like pull request template, for instance, if it flags the has breaking changes that we know about, that triggers some sort of roll up, you know, when we merge it at the end of the week or the next week or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same I have in my mind. And if I have to convert it in practice, I mean, the sandbox project will have a pinned version of what we know we work together. So right now it has a bunch of SHAs for like a few days ago. As soon as we accept the pull request, I can tag like 001 for the sandbox. So we know that the sandbox 001 plays together with those SHAs. From that point in time, we have a snapshot that is the 001 that the sandbox runs. So whatever dependencies you have in that sandbox 001, we know that they are working together, so we're safe. From that, we can create a BC break label in every repository and mark the JSON, in this case, pull request with BC break. And he's a very good developer, so he will write a good description of how to mitigate that. And that's that.
Yeah.
If it works for everybody here, I think it will work for the community we have, because that's representative for what I can tell.
Okay, excellent.
Yep. I mean, sounds like a good starting point. Yeah.
And the sandbox, we are hoping to kind of give it an expiry date of the end of this week or so. Is that correct? So we're hoping to get the sandbox out to everybody as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's my plan. If I can get people like thumbs up on that proposal, I can close it tomorrow. But
okay, yeah. Excellent. Marcus, progress on Hegel owners.
So, right, we created a PR to request additional owners, specific individual owners to Hegel. Gianluca actually opened the PR with my name in it. And then we did get some, we got some comments on that about what sort of, I think there's a link to the actual PR down there. Is it closed? Maintainers for 29. This, so there's
Jeez, a lot of discussion. Okay.
yeah, okay, so 30, 31. So, piggybacking here, some of the concerns that were expressed were about what the makeup of the owners should be. And so I opened a pull request for an owner's MD on Tinkerbell to discuss what exactly an owner would be, which is also linked to the initial one.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see what we got there. Yeah.
These two, is it?
Yeah, I think the long comments I left there was mainly about the format, because I like the idea to have a file that I can parse from a programming language to build automation. But other than that, I'm good with whatever you come up with. So, and also the second point was about avoiding duplication. So if we can have a single place where owners are set in a machine readable format, I'm good. I closed my pull request because you open another one and there is an issue about the standards. So I don't know if the standards has a format already set. So if we have one, I'm good with that.
The standard. So are you talking about the .github pull 4? Talking about that one?
I'm speaking about the issue you have open. Does it?
This
I
one?
see a point about owners MD. So
Right.
I presume it's already the decision.
It's okay. Yeah, I linked that one in the Zoom. So this is the you got it there. Yeah. This is just the definition of what it means to be an owner. So one of the topics that came up when we created the pull request to add owners was what exactly does it mean to be an owner? So this is a definition. It is a definition. It's a starting point. I imagine, like anything else, we would want to evolve it. This is just text. There's no list of users in here. This is in .github. It's in Tinkerbell/.github, so that it could be a central owners.md that we could link to in each individual project. This is different than the code owners file. The code owners file is the file that is a formatted file that follows GitHub standards of directory / owners, well, directory space owners. So we've got a few different topics up there, and we're looking for owners in all of the projects, and we're looking for diverse cast of owners. So we're looking for folks that can represent the code, but folks that can also represent the documentation and the user experience. And so what I've got down there of composition and balance speaks to that. And again, this is like a first draft. So if there's any feedback on ways to improve this, that'd be great. And if anybody wants to start signing up for ownership, raise your hand in the relevant micro repo, micro service.
Yeah, I realize now that those two are two different stuff, owners and code owners. So now I'm happier.
Yeah, that was our confusion there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
I can reopen my podcast with your name.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And then finally, Chitrabasu.
Mute.
Yeah, he's on mute.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
We are, yep.
Okay, sure. So from my side, the only point for the suggestion is a way where we can download the OZ tar file in a bit faster way, or maybe in a more way where actually if the connection, even if the breaks while downloading the tar file, it actually doesn't affect the overall download. For us, at least I have observed that the file size is quite large, and since it takes time for the download, so the overall the download process actually take times, and not only it is also not also bit reliable.
Yep. So for those that have not played or haven't seen this, as part of doing a setup of Tinkerbell, it will download all of the OC, which is the in-memory boot components, and it is a multi-gigabyte tar file, I believe, that is extracted to your local disk. And when you start a machine, OC is essentially what's started on your newly provisioned machine, and there is a lot of components that are in there.
So,
Yes.
while
So
I'm
what I
playing
would like
locally,
to suggest.
yeah, go ahead, Aman.
Okay. So yeah. So my point is here is there is no way to download Aussie file faster. First of all, it's just like you should have an very good internet connection and everything and all, but it can still break and like whatever, right? So the only
No, we can
way.
place it in the torrent file if it requires a long time to download, right?
No.
There are
So
ways
what?
to do it, but right now the
Yeah,
way
there
which
are
we are
ways.
using is using the Amazon S3 bucket, and
Exactly.
it takes a lot of time to download it, and also it is not reliable, as you said that if the connection
So
goes down, the
yeah,
download will
CV,
also break.
you're right. I agree with your point. But
Yeah. So
what is
we
my
need to
point
make
is,
a way so that we can download it without any issues, right?
so if your Aussie file is not downloaded, your setup script will always be stopped, right? So you will not be able to set up. When you do it, it will resume, right? But my point here is, we download the complete Aussie file which contains the grub files or grub templates, and the files for all the uh, Linux distros like CentOS, Ubuntu, CentOS 7, Ubuntu's different versions, and then the for every machine, like a type of machine in the packet, like C3X, BDM, or like whatever it is. So it downloads everything out of those. So the point here I would like to make it, because of that tar file has been put on the S3 bucket, the complete one, right? So we have to distribute that thing. We have to like distribute, or we should say broken down that tar file into different uh, tar files with the relative OS or distros, right? So that, for example, if I would like to provision on CentOS 7, I will also download the tar file, or I will also download the Aussie files which are related to CentOS 7, not the whole Aussie tar, right? And the way to do it is to store that or different Aussie tar files in that way. And that is why we are looking for a session with many to get into the Aussie, so that we can see how the Aussie is actually working and making it.
Right, Aman. I think that is right what you are saying. But apart from that, I think the main point is that how we can make the connection reliable. Even if we are downloading a single component, it will take some time.
So
So
do you mind
we,
if I
yeah.
share a couple of stuff I'm doing for that around that? So Dan made a project that's called Booty, that is like a very good like one to look at. So have a look at that. And I think I also had a chat, and there is an issue that Nathan answered about Aussie. And I think there are a couple of stuff that we need to remember. First, that Aussie is big, it's too big, but it's reasonable to be that big right now because like Packet is the one that Packet is using, and they don't have the workflow, mechanism in place.
Right.
So as soon as they will start moving like stuff outside from Aussie, it will get smaller. We also download, as you pointed out, a lot of stuff that are not used. One of them is like a lot of architectures that you don't really need because usually we need one when we do testing. And as I said before, like the way we are using Tinkerbell when we develop, I mean, I don't know how you use it, but the way I use it when I develop is not the same way like people use when you use Tinkerbell or when you do data center provisioning. like in production. Personally, I have an HTTP proxy that like I use, so I don't go to S3 when I download OZ anymore because it takes too much. And that's how I solve it for my local development. That's it. So long terms, I think stuff will change. So OZ will get smaller. Maybe OZ will look more like Booty than did, that is small and tiny. Who knows? I'm not 100% sure that we should waste too much time on this problem now. I think we will have to do it. I mean, even if a first big like chunk of work would be to change how we package it in a way that would be per architecture and not and not all together. So we will download a fraction of it because we download all that. Like we currently support 4 architecture, I think 4 or 5. If we download only one we need, that's good enough. So, but in the meantime, if you're really struggling, remember that people that do data center provisioning don't download it from our S3 bucket. And I don't do it because I use an HTTP proxy.
Okay, yeah, right. I think that would be good to actually, if we can document that, because for the people who are new, we are actually not aware about that there are other ways we can make it work.
Yeah, sure.
The way I use,
sorry, so I'm gonna do it.
The way I solved this problem for me, I downloaded OZ. I think I remember 3 or 4 months ago, and after that, I think 100 times I've deprovisioned the whole stack and provisioned everything again. And the way I use it is the link I shared in the chat section is by saving that tar file once and setting that environment variable, which can later be used in each time you set up your Tinkerbell provision. So you don't have to download it each time. It's downloaded only once and used every time you do it. Plus, let's say if you have some changes in your workflow helper.sh, what you can do is you can SSH into your provisioner, change the file right there, and then it will be downloaded onto the worker, and you can test your changes right there. You don't need the whole OZ thing there. So if you set this tar flag, the environment variable, you're good to go. So you don't need to download OZ each time.
Okay. And that's how I do it.
I think even for the one-time download, it is only taking a lot of time. I have observed it takes around 4 to 5 hours for me to download that file. Only one time.
No, no, it's not that bad. Okay.
I mean, it depends on your network, so it can be that bad.
So that is also the case, but even if even if it is around a GB file, it will take at least around half an hour or so for a very good connection.
Me too, I think 10 minutes, 10 or 15 max, not more than that.
For me, it takes around 18 minutes, and as Gaurav mentioned, I also did the same thing. I downloaded a tar file once, and then I'm reusing it every time whenever I'm starting or testing anything.
I think
I think we all are using that way only.
So,
I think we certainly can try and make people's lives a little bit easier when downloading this 3 gigabyte file. In theory, we don't want to be downloading 3 gig every time you want to use Tinkerbell. So I think
that was the reason why this flag was introduced.
Okay.
Yeah, real quickly, I feel like there's another issue called make Z smaller, which is I think the actual issue. It's like we're using Alpine 312, which is only 5 megabytes. It's like, wait, why am I downloading a 3 gig file? So I think obviously there's an Ubuntu container. There's like some other stuff in there. Like there's some tools that we should probably fetch and not embed. I think that those are related probably to installing operating systems specifically on Packet and that don't really relate to anybody who's installing this stuff in their own environment. So I think we should consider making that a lot lighter weight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nathan, just because I opened that issue on OZ about like there is a lot of Packet stuff going on here, can we evaluate the possibility to do something like create a new repository for the operating system that contains what we need for the open source right now and move OZ to internally again, so we can.
There's some things that I don't know that we're ready for yet. I still think that we need to, and this, apologies for anybody here external, but this, kind of inside baseball for a minute. So there's some things that we need to, I think, do to bring our own provisioning stack up to speed with Tinkerbell, which is a huge initiative this quarter. And, you know, hopefully bringing that live in Q4 for, like, again, customers necessarily won't like know that that's happening, but we would make the switch over sometime in Q4. At that time, I think, you know, 100% appropriate to go through and be like, what can we cut from here and move into something that is not the Aussie, kind of the community Aussie, and that we make the line a lot clearer between what's being deployed into production and what is, you know, kind of what we want to offer to the community. So, you know, there's a bunch of stuff in here which, you know, quite frankly, just is totally not relevant at all. Like, you know, the 2A2s, you know, the WAS, the QCOM, TX2, yep. Like there's just stuff in here which isn't even relevant. I think that ARM and x86, great. Yep. You know, if there's community demand for other things, wonderful. We should look at that, but there's a lot of stuff in here, including Aussie Runner, which is, you know, huge. Aussie x86 64, which is huge. And those are, you know, really specific to, I don't want to say really specific, like they're just specific to, in a lot of cases, to what we're doing at Packet. So anyways, all that is to say, I don't think that we're quite there yet. I'm guessing that in another month or two, this will become so much easier when we're like, cool, we're not using any of this, so let's get rid of it. So that would be my suggestion, would be wait until we can start to switch some of the stuff over, at which point I think that, you know, it's all fair game.
Excellent. So that's good that is something to look forward to then, because it is it's a beast of a download, and clearly people are struggling with it.
Yep, for sure.
Fantastic. Okay, we're coming to the top of the hour. Thank you very much for everybody for joining. It's good to see some new faces as well, from other people that are on the call that it may be your first time. So thank you very much. As mentioned, there are a number of things in the Tinkerbell proposals repository that you know, will benefit from more people getting involved and having a look at, and giving us feedback on them. If there are ideas that people have, new features that people would like, all of those sorts of things, raise issues, let us know. If you want to help out, that's great. There's a lot of work to do, and thank you very much, everyone.
We're gonna do it next week again. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.